Hello. So it occurred to me that I write and talk a lot about Tales from the Triverse, which is the serial I'm writing at the moment. Well, I have been writing for 2 years now. But what that means is I don't actually get to talk that much about this book, No Adults Allowed, which was something I serialised back in 2020, and then subsequently turned it into a nice paperback and ebook, which you can grab on Amazon. Anyway, a couple of weeks ago I did a talk down at Halesworth Library down in Suffolk here, about the creation of the book, and it's not something I've really talked about on the newsletter very much. And because I had the talk kind of all planned out, I figured it made sense to kind of cover it here in case it would be of interest, because it kind of takes in serialization and publishing in various forms, and I talk a little bit about what the book's about, which is probably something I've not talked about as much as I should. So yeah, let's get into it. So yeah, No Adults Allowed had an unusual journey to publication. Depending on your point of view, I mean, a lot of you who are subscribed to the newsletter are writers of serial fiction, or you have your own newsletter. So some of this won't be quite as unusual, perhaps, as when I was talking to people down at the library who are more used to, getting a book out from a library or going to a bookshop and that kind of thing. So yeah, as you saw, this is the finished article, which I actually have for real here. Went through a few different versions, but this is the current one. And in order to get to this point, it had to go through this little journey to get to where it ended up. So rewinding, all the way back to the beginning, and it originally started life as a serial. And back in 2020, I wasn't using Substack to write my newsletter at that point. I was still entirely on Wattpad, and Wattpad was something I've been using since 2015, I think, and it's kind of how I got into writing. So I'd always wanted to be a writer since I was a kid, and kept telling people I want to be a novelist, and then I never wrote any novels, or I'd dabble for a bit and then get distracted, and then I discovered Wattpad. I think it was at a conference. I was in at South by Southwest in Austin, and I was talking to, it might have been somebody from Tapas or Inkit, one of the other online serialization platforms. And anyway, the short version of that is I got back to the UK and checked out Wattpad and was like, oh, this is interesting, because it's a platform dedicated to serial fiction, really. And that's where I started writing. And it turned out that writing in the serial format, i.e. installments, chapters, episodes, however you want to call it, doing that once a week, like flicked a little switch in my brain, and it went from me never finishing projects and always getting distracted by some new shiny thing to actually committing to a chapter a week and getting through it and getting to the end of projects. And as a result, I ended up writing 2 books that way. So I had A Day of Faces to start off with, and then The Mechanical Crown, which was this big fantasy epic that I wrote, which I'm still really proud of. And then the third book, serial, that I wrote on Wattpad was No Adults Allowed. And yeah, I started writing it started planning it out a bit earlier, but the first chapters went out in February 2020. And as you may recall, the next month, the entire world went a bit strange, and we went into lockdown. And those of you who read the book will already know this, but it's a post-apocalyptic novel. So the little tagline on the top there is an optimistic story about the end of the world, which was fine in February 2020. And then I found myself writing this post-apocalyptic book in the middle of what felt a little bit like an actual apocalypse, because those early months, like, none of us had any idea what was going on. We were seeing all these horrendous images coming out of Italy, and people didn't know how bad it was going to get, and it got pretty bad, obviously. But yeah, writing a book about the end of the world in that time of COVID was very peculiar. But I kept going, and actually it turned out to be a way to kind of, as tends to be the case with writing, it was a way for me to work out some of the thoughts and worries and concerns that I had in my head, put them into the book, and then I'd feel a little bit better by the end of it. But yeah, every week new chapter went out, and it took about almost a year, I think. I deliberately kept No Adults Allowed kind of a fairly slim book. It's not the ridiculous epic that Tales from the Triverse is, or The Mechanical Crown, both of which are enormous. Instead, this is a really tight, focused thing. But yeah, chapter by chapter, week by week. And the thing about writing serials is that it's really easy to write one chapter Like, everyone can write a chapter. But if you do that enough, consistently, you sort of end up with a book at the end of it, almost by accident. Which I know sounds a little bit flippant, but that's kind of how it works in my brain. A novel is a big, scary, monolithic thing. A chapter is very doable. There you go. I had a slide. 31 weeks later, that is how long the book took to be serialised. And yeah, by the end of it, I had a nice third project. No Adults Allowed. You can see there, that's the old version of the cover that was on the serial version. And yeah, it was fairly well read, I suppose, on Wattpad. Like, the numbers on Wattpad are very strange. You have no particular control over what's happening. You're very much a slave to the algorithms, I suppose, and sometimes they smile at you and sometimes they don't. So, in 60,000 reads, what does that actually mean? It's not 60,000 people. It tails off as the book goes along, but there's a decent number of comments. I think it was like 600 comments or something. So people were engaged and had some really nice things to say, and we had some interesting conversations about the themes of the book. And yeah, the serial was done. So I then actually, that's when I pretty much started doing the Substack newsletter, started working on Tales from the Triverse. But at the same time, I was like, No Adults Allowed could be more than that. And I'd wanted for a while to have a go at self-publishing a book. It was, another thing I hadn't done before. So I was like, yeah, let's give it a go. I'll turn No Adults Allowed into a paperback and see what happens. Now, the thing with, well, basically anything you do in life, but any creative project, is you've got these three things: fast, cheap, and good. And you want it to be all of those things, right? But the problem is that you can only pick two. That's just like a rule of making stuff. So, you can have it fast and cheap, but it won't be good. Or you can have it really good and do it on the cheap, but it's going to take you a very long time. You get the idea. So yeah, I wanted it to be good, and I wanted it to not cost very much, because I couldn't afford to hire illustrators or interior layout people. So I had to do everything myself, basically. And that meant it was going to take a while, because I had to figure out how to do all those things, because I was by no means an expert at any of them. So what that basically meant was figuring out how to do the typesetting, the interior design. And for that, I actually turned to Reedsy, which is an online website that is most useful for connecting with other freelancers. Like, if you're looking for a designer, that's the place to go. If you're looking for an editor, that's a good place to go as well. But they also have a free tool for doing simple paperback layouts, and then it will spit out an ebook and a paperback that you can then upload to whatever self-publishing platform you're using. It's very simple, but the end quality is actually pretty decent, and it looks like a proper book, I suppose, although you're not going to be able to, it's very templatey, so you're not going to do anything that's particularly unique. But if you just want it to look like a professional book, it does the job. I also had to figure out how to design a cover, which is more complicated. I ended up using the Affinity software suite for that. And yeah, the thing that's always tricky, because particularly as someone who's not good at maths, like, it's working out all the measurements, particularly of the exterior cover, and trying to work in the spine, which is dependent on how many pages there are, but you don't know how many pages there are until you've got the interior manuscript. Anyway, it all worked out fine, and I'm quite pleased with it. The original version of the cover was actually quite different, so we've got a whole bunch of different versions here. You can see top left, that was the very original version that went out on Wattpad, with the kind of the handle on the door, which I thought was a really clever cover design. Like the kind of, the little things that kids hook on their doors to say parents keep out, that kind of thing. Thought it was really clever, but it had absolutely nothing to do with the story and confused a lot of people, I think. Then you can see I went through this whole kind of prototyping phase. The top right version was kind of the cover I ended up with on Wattpad at the very end, with his hand-drawn wolf and the kid. Bottom left is the original paperback version with the black and the white and the red. I wasn't very happy with that still, and actually turned to the Substack writing community and said, right, look, this book is not selling. Here's the front cover, here's the blurb. What do you think? Tell me what's wrong. How can I improve it? And I got an incredible range of really, really spot-on feedback that then led to the final iteration of the cover, which eventually ended up becoming the one that is on the bottom right, which is this one, which is what we ended up with. But yeah, the nice thing about self-publishing is that you can continually tweak things like this. You can fiddle around for as long as you want. Like the initial version that goes out doesn't have to be the final version. And then next thing you know, it's on Amazon. I just did it on Amazon because it was very much me learning the ropes. You can obviously still buy it there, wherever you are in the world, paperback, ebook, and it was a great experience trying to figure out how to do it. I've even got a few reviews, only a handful, but they're all very positive, which is lovely. And I actually discovered recently that it's on Goodreads as well. I think they're affiliated or owned by Amazon, so it must be something to do with that. But anyway, it appeared on Goodreads, and again, there's some nice reviews. So what I should probably say, having gibbered about the creation of it, is what is it? What is No Adults Allowed actually all about? So the most obvious thing is it's about apocalypse, which, like I say, was really strange to write during a pandemic, but actually probably quite useful for my own mental health in that period. And maybe because it's optimistic, it's not meant to be a downer, even though bad things have happened in it. It's about hope, I suppose. So from that regard, people reading it, I think, hopefully got that kind of vibe from it. It's also about artificial intelligence, and I'm now aware that is strange to have written now that AI is sort of a thing. So it's certainly being discussed in a way now that is very different. I mean, I wrote the book in 2020, and it was only 2 years later that Midjourney and ChatGPT appeared on the scene, and suddenly we all have to wrestle with various ethical concerns and future concerns about what the impact is going to have on the world. And this book was me examining that before any of that was a thing. I assumed AI as a general concept was going to remain science fictional for at least another decade, probably more than that. And although the current AI hype cycle is ridiculous and it's nothing like the artificial intelligence that we all thought of as being AI, the things we see in Star Trek and 2001 and the stuff like that, it still changed the debate. And I'm quite pleased that No Adults Allowed hasn't, I don't think it's dated badly. I think the themes that are explored in it still kind of work and make sense, even in this massively shifted environment of AI discussion. It's also about this thing called inherited prejudice. When I say it's called that, I don't know if it's called that, it's just what I call it, which is basically how adults mess everything up. So this is the theory that a lot of the world's problems actually originate decades ago, centuries, even thousands of years ago, and they're generational things that are handed down through the years from parents to children, and actually the root cause, the root offence that caused a conflict quite often has nothing to do with the people currently alive who are perpetuating it, but it's handed down through the years as inherited prejudice or biases, or the way different cultures and different peoples look at each other in good and bad ways. And what I wanted to do was, in a science fictional context, say, right, what if you could actually cut off that inheritance of prejudice and conflict from the past, and just have a generation of children that didn't inherit any of that, their parents didn't hand anything down to them? What would that mean? What would that do to society and the people? So that's a big theme that is explored all the way through it. And kind of related to that is parenting. So when I was writing this, my son was about 6, I think, give or take. But I was a new parent still, relatively speaking, and this was me exploring parenting and the different types of parenting that you can either be parented by or be a parent towards your own child. Some of which have their pros and cons. Not every way of doing it is a particularly great way to do it, but it's so dependent on your own point of view. And No Adults Allowed was me exploring some of those ideas, even though, something I haven't mentioned is, it's called No Adults Allowed because there are no adults in the book. It's all just kids. So exploring parenting, or the absence of it, and the impact on the kids, that's what that was all about. And inevitably, it's about young people and how young people have so much responsibility placed upon them to fix the problems inherited and brought along by the previous generations. And when I wrote this was a period in particular where there was such a lot of activism, particularly by young people, in all sorts of areas, and it felt extremely hopeful that the younger generations seemed to have a much better handle on what was a good idea in terms of managing the world's issues than the older generations, my generations and above. In terms of influences, a big obvious influence is Lord of the Flies. So this was like a set text when I was a kid. It's a brilliant book, but I wanted to take the central concept, which was you dump a load of kids into a kind of semi-hostile environment, or an environment where they're completely cut off from society and adults, and then you see what happens. And Lord of the Flies is a very cynical, depressing, dark book, and I wanted to flip that on its head a little bit and go, well, what if it actually worked out quite nicely? Like there's boys and girls in my book, and one reader said, "Oh, is that why it works better? Because in Lord of the Flies, it's just a load of boys from a boys' school that get stranded on this island together, and then it all goes horribly wrong." I don't know if that wasn't really a conscious decision, but it's definitely a factor. Like a point of the book is that you need a mix of different people to make a society actually function in a useful way. The other touch points, possibly more sort of stylistically and structurally, rather than in terms of plot, is Apocalypse Now or Heart of Darkness, the novel that the film is based upon, and that kind of structural conceit of starting off somewhere fairly comfortable, and then as the story progresses, you kind of go further and further into the darkness and into a kind of madness that you feel like you can't ever withdraw from, and things get stranger and stranger as you go through these different, almost episodic encounters. That No Adults Allowed has that kind of structure as well. The other thing is Northumberland. So place is really important in the book, and Northumberland is a place in the UK that I absolutely love, and specifically there's a place called Cragside there, which was built and owned by Lord Armstrong, who was an arms dealer a long time ago, and he was an arms dealer who then ended up becoming a kind of inventor. His house is the first hydroelectric house in the world, I think, ever. And it was the first electrically illuminated house in the UK at the time, I believe. So yeah, arms dealer who went on to be an inventor. He's kind of a Tony Stark of his day, I suppose. But the place is amazing, and you can go and visit it now and go for a walk around the grounds, and yeah, it's a magical place. But if you read the book, you'll find out that it's actually set there. Anyone who knows the area will probably pick up on it in the book. People further afield might just think it's a fictional place, but it is all rooted in an actual space, and you can kind of track the progress of the characters as they travel through real spaces in England. And my son. So, like I said, having a son was a big impact on the book. I don't think I would have written this book if I hadn't become a dad, because it's all about that kind of stuff. It's all the things that were buzzing around in my head at the time. It's actually dedicated to him as well. He's not read it yet, but he is probably old enough now, so he might read it soon, and then we'll see what he thinks. That's kind of a scary thought. In terms of what next, I mean, if you're reading this newsletter, you kind of already know what was next, which is the newsletter. So after No Adults Allowed, and I'd already done The Mechanical Crown and A Day of Faces, and I was like, the Wattpad thing was great, and the numbers were occasionally huge and really exciting, but it kind of never amounted to anything. And I wanted to have a bit more control over what I was doing and what it meant, and that required me to control a bit more what I was doing. So I was like, I'll try doing a newsletter. I've never done that properly before. And there was this new crowd of tools that had appeared. So you had like Button Down, Ghost was a thing, Substack was there as well. There's a few more now. But yeah, it seemed like an interesting model, and it was a way to really focus on the writing and not have to worry too much about the tech side of things. So that's what I've done. And if you're a reader, if you're watching this because you're a subscriber, you know exactly what I do. But it's a mixture of writing tips and then Tales from the Triverse, which is my fourth serial that I'm now doing, which is proving to be a big one. So yes, but if you like science fiction and fantasy wrapped up in a detective novel, then do check it out. It's good fun. And yeah, if you like the sound of No Adults Allowed, you can grab that on Amazon, but obviously no obligation, but it's good fun. It's not that expensive either. Anyway, so yeah, that's how the book came to be and why I wrote it, and the funny little route it took to becoming what it is today. Anyway, jump down into the comments if you've got any questions, either about the book itself or the process. I'm very happy to share stuff. I mean, I'm still learning how to do all this, but yeah, I'll see you down there for discussion. Thanks for watching.